I just bought this E92 M3, but it's been in a wreck and it's pretty rough, but I love the spec. This 2008 E92 M3 was relatively cheap in comparison to a lot of the other E92s that I looked at, and probably for good reason because it needs a lot of work. But if you guys know anything about this channel, I'm always looking for the perfectly imperfect cars to dive into and refresh, rebuild, and just give them a new opportunity at life. If you guys have been watching this channel for a while, you know that I used to have an Alpine White E90 in DCT. I've always regretted selling that car, and I knew that one day I would return to the S65 platform. However, this time I wanted to try it in the coupe and I wanted to try it in the manual. After about 2 months of searching in 4 cars that I passed up on, I finally found this M3 that I think is going to be a really good candidate for the channel. There's a caveat. It's not quite perfect. This one in particular is a 2008 and it has about 92,000 miles on it. So it has seen the road, and not only has it seen the road, it's definitely seen some track days too. Nothing that isn't fixable, but it's going to take a lot of TLC to get this car back into condition where I'm happy with it. Now this car has had 3 owners in the past, and back in 2015, 7 years ago, this car was involved in an accident. It was a moderate collision to the front right. So I think it's safe to assume that the front end was likely resprayed. But I would say for a repaint, they did a really good job. This E92 M3 was a Texas car its entire life until I brought it home to the Carolinas. At first glance, this car might just look jet black. However, this paint coat is actually Jerez Black Metallic. It is a really cool color. On overcast days like today, it just looks like a black car. But once you see this thing in the sun, it has a ton of blue in it. It almost looks like tanzanite or a darker navy. I wasn't really sure how I was gonna like this car when I saw it in person, but as soon as I did, I fell in love with it. The car also came with a bunch of modifications done to it. Currently, it is rocking a squared setup of Apex Arc 8s in satin black. The exhaust is a full catback by Meisterschaft. This exhaust sounds really good. The current suspension setup is H&R Super Sport springs on Bilstein shocks. It also has a couple of cooling modifications like the CSF radiator and the CSF oil cooler, as well as front and rear H&R sway bars. The interior on the spec that I went for is Fox Red with 3 pedals, manual transmission. It does have the single hump, however, it does not have the carbon fiber roof. Like I said before, I ended up checking out 4 different E92 M3s that I passed on, and they all varied in mileage and year. 3 of those E92 M3s all had carbon fiber roofs, and all 3 of those carbon fiber roofs were failing. The clear coat was either chipping or the carbon was already turning yellow. Ultimately, I just decided, let's do the sunroof. Overall, the car looks pretty good. However, it's far from perfect. It wouldn't be a 90,000 mile 2008 M3 if it didn't have its fair share of problems. Let's take a look at the few things that we've discovered so far. A very common problem that you will see in some higher mileage examples of S65s is valve covers that are just beginning to leak, flake, deform a bit, and possibly weeping or seeping from the edges. Surprisingly enough, this one actually doesn't look too bad for being at 90,000 miles. Now, it is possible that the previous owner did actually replace these valve covers, but nonetheless, the valve covers will be addressed. Now, as you guys already know, the S65s are prone to having pretty bad rod bearing wear, and generally, it's just a good idea to go ahead and change the rod bearings on these motors. This is a process that I've already gone through on my E90 M3. However, this time around, I think we're gonna go with BE bearings, and we're going to be using ARP bolts. Now, while it's entirely possible that one of the previous owners already did the rod bearing service in this car, I don't know for certain if it was done, and if it was done, when it was done, which rod bearings were actually used, and most importantly, if it was done correctly. So we're just gonna go ahead and take care of that anyways. And that should set us up in a really good position with this motor. So taking a look underneath the car, things are pretty dry, which is a great sign. A lot of times when people change the oil in these S65s, you just get a lot of spillover that tends tends to drip all along here, and it may look like you have an oil leak, but it's not really an oil leak. It's actually just excessive oil that is spilled out from up top when changing the filter. However, in our case, it is pretty clean under here, so we don't have too much to worry about. One of the other common areas where you tend to see a lot of oil buildup is right around the drain plug. These drain plugs are meant for one-time use only. They have a crush washer on them, and what happens is when people change the oil, they don't replace the drain plug. And so you start getting a bit of oil pooling up around the drain plug, which ends up just leaking onto your garage floor. Now, when I came out to the car this morning, I did notice a little bit of oil on the ground, and it was coming out of the drain plug. So that tells me right away that someone probably just did the oil and they didn't replace the drain plug. Not a big deal, easy fix. I pretty much already knew that this car was going to need new motor mounts, but what really confirmed it for me was the sway bar. There's hardly any room between the sway bar and the oil pan, which tells me right away these mounts are toast. So once we do rod bearing service on this car, we'll go ahead and tackle the motor mounts as well. Right here you can see the aftermarket oil cooler. I'm not sure who makes this. It's either CSF or Mishimoto. And right here you guys can see our CSF upgraded radiator, which is also a huge plus to have in this car. The car also has upgraded front and rear sway bars. The front is a very easy upgrade. I did this also on my E36 M3 and my M2, but the rear, however, that's a different story. In order to install that upgraded rear sway bar, you have to actually drop the rear subframe. It's quite a lot of work. So it's nice that we already have one in here and we don't need to mess with that in the future. The differential looks pretty good. I'm not seeing any leaks. However, we will do a differential service and just replenish all the fluids in that diff. Up front, you can see our H&R Super Sport springs as well as our Bilstein shocks. Unfortunately, these Bilstein shocks have seen better days and they are just past their prime. They're just in very rough shape. So we are going to go ahead and upgrade the full suspension on this car to just something a little bit better. I haven't quite decided which suspension setup I'm going to run on this M3. Typically, I run the KWV2s or the KWV3s, add in some Vorschlag or ground control camber plates. But on this little rebuild, we might actually try a different type of suspension setup, like maybe some Öhlins Road and Track. We'll just have to see what I can get my hands on. These wheels may look familiar. These are the Apex Arc 8s. These are in a square setup on this car, 18-inch all the way around. I believe it's a 10.5. The Arc 8s are wrapped in Michelin Pilot Super Sports all the way around, 265, 40, 18. However, right now with the current suspension setup, these springs are relatively low and we are getting a bit of rubbing on the rear fender liner back here. So we'll see what happens when I throw in the KWs and I have a little bit more room to go up. It's pretty slammed in the front, so we might be able to get away with the 40 sidewall, but inevitably, in the future, these wheels are gonna go. Obviously, nothing wrong with the Arc 8s. They are a fantastic wheel, a crowd favorite, but I think that we've owned too many sets of Arc 8s on this channel, so we can do better. You'll also notice up top that we have a little AFE power intake. Not a fan. I don't really know that this thing is doing much for us, but I do know that it doesn't fit very well. It doesn't look very good. I think you and I both know what needs to go right here. Instead of this plastic, it'd be nice to see some carbon fiber there. A couple of companies that make some really nice carbon fiber plenums, and I think we're gonna need that on our F65. Now, this was the side where my M3 was in an accident 7 years ago. However, I think that this was probably after the accident actually happened. And you can see under here that all of these under trays are basically just gone. They never got replaced. And a lot of E90s and E92s and E93 M3s are just basically missing all of these under trays. Under trays with the S65 are always a problem. And not only are they just a problem, but they are expensive to fix. And they're just made out of plastic, which means you're just gonna continually be replacing them. I had the exact same struggles on my E90 M3. I had to replace all of the under panels. This one right here is gonna cost you a cool $350 from BMW. The two little ones that go on the left and right side, those are $100 each. So there's really no sense in just replacing them with plastic again. There are a few companies that actually make metal or aluminum upgraded skid plates for this car. They look a lot better and they're going to last a lot longer. Another common issue with high mileage older E92, E90 M3s, the hood struts go out. I had to replace mine on my E90 as well. We're just gonna have to go ahead and order a new set of those. This M3 badge is looking pretty rough. We can't be rolling around like that. The guys over at I&D hooked it up with the gloss black M3 version. I think that's gonna look a lot nicer. The roundels are also going to get the same I&D treatment, and you know we can't be rolling around with these crusty side markers. I&D has supplied us with paint match Jerez black metallic side markers. It's gonna look real nice. And look at how cool this paint is. Jerez black metallic is such an interesting color. It's almost like like a tanzanite. If you put it up next to black, it's definitely a lot different. My 135 is in jet black. This has a lot more blue in it. It's almost like a navy. Such a cool color. So now we get to talk a little bit about the interior on this car, which also is going to need a little bit of TLC. Now the steering wheel is surprisingly in pretty good condition. It was probably rewrapped at one point. However, we will do an upgraded steering wheel. Nothing too crazy. I am going to try and keep it as OEM as possible, just with a little bit of my personal touch. If we take a look at the shift knob, it has seen better days. This is probably the most wear that I see in this car. This thing looks absolutely rough, but it's okay. I have the remedy, brand new ZHP shift knob from BMW. Now that is much better. Another thing that I noticed right off the bat when I bought this car was something was up with the sound system. I'm only getting sound coming out of the left side of the car. Now we do have an aftermarket head unit in here, which I'm gonna be honest, I completely hate this thing. This is gonna get swapped out for either an OEM option or something that's along the lines of OEM, but just a little bit nicer. More than likely when this was wired in, there's probably some other wiring issues going on, or it's just very possible that the speaker in this door card is just not connected. We'll have to figure it out once I pull off the actual door cards and see what's wrong. One of the super common problems with these cars is the plastic that you see on the handles on the inside and here. They do begin to fail over time, so we will actually pull these out, and I'll go ahead and just refinish these myself. You'll also notice that the trims tend to do the same thing as well, and I actually did a DIY on my E90 where I fixed the trim and it came out really good, so we'll probably use the same method for that also. I personally really like this trim. I also had this in my E90 where it's this leather carbon fiber look, but it looks really nice in the car, and I don't intend on changing this because I think it suits this car really well. You'll notice that this car also has EDC. However, I think it's been coated out. It doesn't seem to work, but that's really not that big of a deal for us anyways. We are going to be running a coilover setup. I don't find myself using electronics like EDC that often in cars like this. To no surprise, the floor mats are just completely trash in this car. That's okay. I have a few sets of floor mats in the other garage, so we'll swap those out as well. For 90,000 miles, the interior isn't too bad. These front seats, however, are pretty worn, and we are going to be changing out the front seats in this car. One of the bigger annoyances, in my opinion, with the E8X and the E9X cars is these seats just sit really high up. A lot of the F chassis cars sit a lot lower, especially if you go for something aftermarket like Recaro Sportsters or the Recaro pole positions or maybe some Sparcos. They all tend to sit a little bit lower, which I prefer, so we will end up swapping these out for either we'll upgrade to like an F chassis seat, like an M4 seat that matches our red interior, or we will go ahead with Recaro Sportsters. The rear seats, however, are pretty much flawless. They're in really good condition, which isn't too surprising. Not a lot of people use the rear seats in an E92 M3. Most of the trims on the car are pretty beat up. They are gonna have to be replaced. What we'll likely do is when we go in for paint, because we are gonna have some paint work and body work done on this car, I'll just have these resprayed in gloss black. I'm gonna try and do my best to tackle as much body work in one shot as possible. I am going to be running the European style front bumper, which ends up deleting these orange reflectors. The fenders actually look like they're in pretty good condition. Now, when this car was in an accident, it was actually hit from this side, and that accident was about 7 years ago. So you would have to imagine the whole front end was probably resprayed. However, 7 years of probably tracking this car and just driving it up to the 90,000 miles has taken its toll on the paint. The front bumper in general is just rather peppered, and it does have a crease. It looks like definitely got into some little fender bender here. There's also a one right over here. So it just makes sense to go ahead and replace the entire front bumper. The fenders aren't too bad. However, we are going to be repainting the hood because the hood has a lot of little nicks on it. It's just going to be easier to respray the whole front end at once and blend it into the fenders to make sure that we get a really nice match than trying to just do the bumper and the hood. The headlights are rough. Man, when I first saw this car, I was pretty nervous because these headlights have seen better days. However, one pass with the polisher, they look a lot better. This is the side that I hit with the polisher, literally 30 seconds of polishing on it, and it already looks so much better. Again, going to this side, that's how we looked before. Going to this side, this is how we look now. And that is without any wet sanding. So just using a little bit of polishing compound and spending about 30 seconds on that headlight, I made it look a lot better already. So I'm pretty confident that when we go to paint, I can pull out those headlights and completely restore them so they are perfect. Another common leak area is going to be your power steering reservoir. This tends to leak a lot. We'll probably end up just replacing this entire reservoir because it's not that expensive. But overall, this engine and the engine bay doesn't look that bad. It looks pretty clean for a 2008 with 90,000 plus miles. This looks pretty dang good. Now, who knows what those rod bearings look like, but We'll find out. The car definitely has its fair share of little nicks and dings all over it. Not too bad, but definitely gonna have my PDR guy come out and just take care of those in one shot. The paint has been taken care of relatively well. I mean, it is a 2008. It has been driven, so it's fair to assume that it's going to have some swirls, which it definitely does. However, it's not that bad. Aside from the front end that it's just gonna have to be repainted because of all the chips, I think that I can bring the majority of this paint back to damn near perfection. After I get this paint looking good, we can go ahead and PP at the front end, and then of course, ceramic coat it. It's gonna make washing this car so much easier. But overall, I'm really excited to see this Jerez black metallic paint come to life. It is such a unique color. You really have to see it in person. It has a lot of purple and blue hues in it. And in the sunlight, it really does look like tanzanite or just straight up midnight navy. But in the shadows, it really just looks black. It's just a very, very unique and interesting color. Taking a look at the rear end, we are gonna go ahead and actually update these taillights to the LCI taillights. The taillights on my E92 M3 have also seen better days. They do have some little cracks on them, just like micro abrasions. They're not in the best condition, but I think that the LCI taillights look a lot better on these cars, and they do make a conversion kit for those on these cars. So we'll go ahead and order that, and I think it's really gonna tie in this rear end. This guy right here is pretty nasty. We're gonna have to do a little bit of body work on this. May even have to do a respray on the rear quarter and maybe fade it into the door. Something like this, you're just not gonna be able to cover up with touch-up paint. Probably gonna have to do a little bit of body work, which I don't mind. Again, we're gonna have this thing in the paint booth. We're gonna pull a lot of stuff out in order to make paint happen properly. So if you're already there, you might as well take care of it. Something else that I noticed with this car that I really despised almost immediately was the window tint. It's not that the tint looks bad, I just kind of prefer this car without window tint, but take a look at the cheap film that they used on the car. Don't get me wrong, I am all for branding your products, but leaving the 3M stamp on the window tint, that's the first time I've seen something like that. I don't know if it was just like the end of the window tint roll where all of these 3M stamps are on it. I can't imagine that someone would go get their windows tinted, see the 3M on their window, and be okay with that. It's all over the car. Every single window has 3M stamps all over it, so we'll be taking that tint off. If you are an E9X owner, this will not surprise you at all. If you have had an E92 or E93 or E90, you know for a fact that having an actual cup holder that works is quite the flex. However, we have one that does not. It's likely that it's just the spring inside of here, but I will go ahead and take that apart and make sure that we fix it. If we have to replace it, we have to replace it. Some people really don't like these cup holders. I've always really liked them. Overall, this interior is really, really nice in this car. It's pretty well taken care of, being that this is a 2008 and it has 90,000+ miles on it. There were quite a few cars that I looked at, and all of the interiors were in really rough shape. Even the lower mileage E92, E90 M3 interiors just didn't look so good. So I think that we lucked out on the interior. I think the interior in this car is in pretty good shape for how old and how many miles this car has on it. We will make some subtle changes, but the majority of work that we do on this car is going to be body work, a bit of mechanical work. We're gonna be doing some transmission work as well, suspension, and lastly, brakes. Something that I noticed immediately when I bought this car where the brakes were really bad. So bad to the point that they were a bit scary to drive. So I stopped by to see my friends over at CES Motorsport, and we actually did a full brake bleed procedure on this car just to make sure that we didn't have any air pockets in the lines. After putting fresh fluid in, which it definitely needed, and bleeding the brakes, I still was running into the same problem with a very just mushy brake pedal and very, very soft braking. Now there could be a few reasons for this. It could be that our master cylinder is just going bad. It could be that the lines are just old and have seen better days, or it could be that the entire car just needs a complete brake refresh. The rotors really don't feel bad at all. There's no lip on the edge of the rotor. The pads don't look great, but we're gonna go ahead and replace all that anyways. And of course, we're gonna do some upgraded steel lines. This already has steel lines on it, however, they look pretty old. So before I go ahead and buy a new master cylinder, I'm just gonna do a full brake refresh. If none of that works and we're still running into problems, it could be a caliper issue. I'm either gonna have to have some of the calipers rebuilt, or of course just buy new ones. Other things that you know are just going to be bad on an aged car like this: cowls, Of course, always disgusting. Window seals can be pretty bad. This one isn't terrible up front. However, I am gonna replace it anyways because it has some melting on the edges. The windshield was probably replaced not too long ago because it's actually really clean. The rear window seal, however, has seen better days and will also need replacing. Now, when I bought this car, I noticed a faint smell of fuel almost immediately. I wasn't quite sure where that leak was actually coming from, but I started with the injectors. After confirming that all of the injectors were in fact dry and we weren't losing any fuel out of there, I decided to take a look under the cap on top of the fuel tank on the side that actually sends the fuel out from the fuel tank. Underneath here, you're gonna see this plastic cap right here that has a hose going out of it. And you can also notice on mine, it's pretty wet. There's actually fuel puddling up in the back over here. So what tends to happen is that plastic, it'll just get old and start to crack. And once it does that, the fuel will start seeping through the plastic. So I'm actually going to replace that as well and do that immediately. The last thing that we want is fuel leaking out of this car. I've gone ahead and wiped away a lot of the debris that was on top, and you can actually see the little micro cracks that are in the plastic. You can feel them as well. If we were to turn the car on right now, I can pretty much guarantee you that fuel would start bubbling up out of these little cracks. That's not good. So there you guys have it. We are back in an S65. It's safe to say that we have our work cut out for us, but I'm up for the challenge, and I think this is gonna be a really good refresh or rebuild, if you really wanna call it that. This car is far from perfect, and it definitely has a good amount of flaws that I'm gonna do the best of my ability to bring this thing back to life. It's just one of those cars that you can tell it was given up on in its previous life, and it just needed a new owner to step in and give it a fresh start. We've got a lot of plans in store for this car. It's gonna be a very fun series, and I can't wait to bring you guys along for the ride. There's just something about this car that has just always given me nothing but smiles. I'm just always going to be a fan of the S65 and the E9X generation cars. It's such an awesome combination to have. One thing is for certain, we need an alignment. This thing is definitely way out of whack, but that's okay. We can worry about that a little bit later. We have a lot of work to do. We're gonna be replacing this entire suspension anyways, so we'll tackle the alignment later. But even though she isn't perfect, man, does it feel good to be back in an E9X car. I've got a soft spot for the S65. I've got a soft spot for the E9X M3s, but I'm really excited about this, the manual. This is new for me. Last time I had the DCT and it was really nice, but I think if I'm gonna have a car that's just like a fun car and a project car, I would much rather have a manual. So I think it's fair to say that we definitely have our work cut out for us. This is going to be one heck of a build, but I'm completely on board with bringing this thing back to life, and I think that this car just deserves a second chance. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for the support. I'm so grateful to have you guys rocking with me. I'll see you in the next one.